Welcome back, Bio3D Prep. We are going to be talking about properties of the cell, cell structure and organelles, and cell processes in this lecture. And this is the first lecture in which you'll be doing a little bit of reading from the textbook, pages 154, 155, page 74 and 75, and page 546 and 547. By the end of this lecture, you'll be able to describe cellular processes in general terms. You'll be talking about how cells obtain nutrients and energy and dispose of waste. You'll compare prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells, compare animal cells and plant cells, identify cellular structures and their functions in general terms. And finally, you'll be able to compare methods of cellular reproduction, again in general terms. So the first thing we should look at are what's called the domains of life. All cells can be categorized into one of three domains of life. Now the placement in these domains of life depends on cellular anatomy. So this is on a cellular level that things are being compared, such as the presence of organelles and particular proteins inside of the cell, cellular organization, multicellular organisms versus single-celled organisms, and also their genetic structure. If you take a look at these three domains, their names are eukarya, bacteria, and the archaea. And if you just take a look at the types of organisms that you find in each, what you'll find is in the eukarya, this is where we find what we think of as being living organisms. Most organisms that we think of for example, all animals, wow, that's a horrible spelling of animals here. Let's try that again. So, animals, plants, fungi, just put anything you think of as being a living organism is in this eukarya domain. In turn, the reason they're all grouped together is because their cells have a nucleus. So that's the number one grouping or factor that groups them together. Also, you'll notice almost all of these organisms can engage in sexual reproduction. Phenotypically, they're very diverse. They've got the plants, fungi, animals, protists, even these little dudes here. As long as there's a nucleus inside of their cell, they're part of the eukarya domain. The other two domains are much larger. These two domains make up the majority of species. So even though we don't really think about these things because they're microscopic and we don't see them very much, but this is the majority of species. Let's try that again. Or another way to look at it is this is actually the majority of living organisms. Now these two groups are all prokaryotic cells, so cells without a nucleus. They're unicellular, so every single one of these organisms is only one cell big. And the rest is a wide variety of properties. Most of them reproduce asexually. Heterotrophic and autotrophic, some of them make their own food through photosynthesis or chemosynthesis. Others eat other bacteria or archaea. So there's a wide variety of characteristics, but what you should be getting from this picture at least is that the majority of species are in these two domains, bacteria and archaea. All of the things that we think about as being a living organism are in the eukarya. Their cells have a nucleus. So if we take a look at the prokaryotic cell, prokaryotic cells are relatively simple. They consist of some kind of cell wall or a capsule around the cell wall, plasma membrane, and we're going to be talking about this in the next lecture. Every living organism, every cell has a cell or a plasma membrane. This is the way it interacts with the rest of the world. After that, they're mostly cytoplasm. In terms of organelles, the only organelle they really have are ribosomes. It turns out that their DNA and RNA are stored in plasmids. They also have a bit of central location, but their DNA is actually circular, which is a big difference from ours. Ours is double helix. And then pillae are just the way they interact with the world. It allows for things to enter their cell membrane and exit, especially through that cell wall and that capsule. So that's a general prokaryotic cell. The big thing that you should be seeing is a lack of organelles. And we talk about what exactly an organelle is in a couple minutes. And they also lack a nucleus. Those are the two big things when we are looking at bacteria. And archaea are much the same. They actually don't have DNA, they just have RNA, but it's a distinction we're not going to worry about too much. When we look at animal cells, these would be our cells, anything you think of as being an animal moving around. If you take a look, the one thing you should notice, way more labels, because they have way more organelles. So things like mitochondria, centrosomes for cell reproduction. Here's the nucleus. That's what puts them in that eukarya. Domain. Endoplasmic reticulum. Lots and lots of different organelles. So each one of these things is an organelle. We'll be talking about their specific function in a little bit. When we look at a generalized plant cell, here's what we see. Same sort of organelles if you take a look. Now they're not labeled. Some of them aren't labeled. But you'll see here, mitochondria. It looks almost exactly the same as it does in the animal cell. Again, you're going to see the same kind of structures here. Here we have the nucleus again. And we can see right beside the nucleus is some rough ER and some smooth ER. Same structure, same arrangement as what you'll see in that generalized animal cell. Couple of extra organelles, and they're detailed out. So most plant cells have a central vacuole. It's a large membrane-bound fluid-filled storage sac that gives added internal support and stores water and other molecules. So really, it's a big storage unit for plant cells. The other thing that you should recognize that makes plants kind of special, at least in the eukarya world, is the presence of chloroplasts. These are the things that do photosynthesis. So what they actually do is they're converting solar energy, energy from sunlight, into carbohydrates. So they're making carbohydrates, they're making starches, sugars, and those starches and sugars are storage devices for energy. It's actually stored sunlight that can then be used for other cellular activities. And the other one I want to draw your attention to would be the cell wall. All plant cells have this rigid cell wall that protects the cell. And mostly it allows for support. Trees have to grow nice and big and tall. They need something rigid supporting those cells. Now when we look at cells, cells are an open system. They have to interact with the environment around them. So in order to do that, they have specialized structures called organelles. And these organelles, and in many ways, they're analogous to our organs. Each one of the organs in the human body has a specific function to allow the whole body to interact with its environment and stay alive. So organelles are analogous to organs. They have to do things like reproduction and growth. They're responsible for energy production, the intake of nutrients, and the removal of waste. The movement of the cells. Some cells move around to find their food and avoid danger and all that fun stuff. There's also organelles that are responsible for responding to stimuli. So if the concentration of food seems to be growing if you travel in a certain direction, then as a cell, you would want to travel in that direction. Cells are constantly reacting to their interior and exterior environments to maintain efficiency. So cells are constantly undergoing change in terms of the nutrients that are inside of them and the waste products inside of them, the processes that are happening in order to be efficient and conserve energy. Because if you run out of energy, you're as good as dead. So here's an overview of cell structure. One thing I want you to notice is that when we draw these generalized cells, all these pictures look a little bit different depending on who drew them, but something that you should notice is that the general structures, for example, the mitochondria, always have the same basic diagram. So these always kind of look like beans. Some people say kidney beans, with kind of a wavy line in the middle, with a wide, wavy line. If you take a look at Golgi Apparatus, this is what people call the stack of pancakes, but it's always separate from the nucleus. And it looks kind of like a stack of pancakes all thrown together. Different again from, say, the endoplasmic reticulum. You'll always be able to find endoplasmic reticulum because some of it will have these little dots on it, and those dots are ribosomes. So there's a ribosome labeled down at the bottom of the diagram here, this little blue dot. It's the same as all these other blue dots that are on the endoplasmic reticulum. So if you find little blue dots on a wavy line, you know that's rough endoplasmic reticulum. And right beside it, you're going to find the smooth endoplasmic reticulum without the dots. And so if you go back and look at the plant and animal cell before this, same sort of structures, same sort of diagrams. The nucleus is usually drawn in the center of the cell with a bunch of squiggly lines in the middle, and often these little holes drawn in it, nucleopores. So even though each diagram looks a little bit different, if you look at how each structure is diagrammed, the diagram for each structure is similar, the diagram for each organelle. So there's no one common cell, but all are organized along a similar plan. Protoplasm is a big word for all material within the cell. This includes water, molecules, and organelles. So it's everything inside of a cell. Cytoplasm is the area of the protoplasm outside the nucleus. So really, it's all this stuff outside the nucleus but inside of our cell membrane. That's cytoplasm. The purpose of cytoplasm is it's going to be responsible for processing nutrients and storing waste. The cell membrane is connected to the external environment. So the cell membrane in this picture, plasma membrane, plasma cell membrane, here we go. It's this purpley pink color all along the outside of our cell. And that's what keeps the inside of the cell separated from its environment. Very important, as it is a gatekeeper. There are receptor sites. These are usually made of protein. And they act as little gatekeepers. They determine if a molecule can come into the cell or come out of the cell, or if it's not allowed in at all. Now we'll take a look at the nucleus. So it's only in eukaryotic cells, so plants and animal cells, only in eukarya in terms of the domain. And cells without a nucleus we know are prokaryotic cells, and bacteria, blue-green algae are a couple examples. The purpose of the nucleus is it contains our genetic material, our DNA, also called chromatin. The other thing in there is the nucleolus. It's responsible for making ribosomes. And the nuclear membrane is a protective structure. Our genetic material, or a cell's genetic material, is probably the most important thing it has. It's the most important substance in a cell. From that are the instructions for all organelles, proteins, everything. Every single cell in your body contains the information to make every part of your body. And this is the whole idea behind cloning or whatever. If at some point, and they're doing it in other animals, but it's possible to take one cell from one organism, and in the nucleus of that cell is all the information needed to make a brand new organism exactly the same. So, and we aren't quite there yet, but the idea is if we were to take one cell from your body, the nucleus of that cell contains all the information to make you. A brand new you as a baby, and as that baby grew up, it would look exactly the way you do now. So that's why it's so important, and that's why there's a nuclear membrane. It's a protective structure. It's there to keep all of that genetic material safe from damage. Damage from other molecules, damage from UV light. It's a protective structure and allows for the passage of large molecules when it's necessary. So sometimes there's copies of that DNA made. Those copies have to travel out into the cytoplasm in order to make new organelles. So mitochondria is probably, if we want to go by importance, it's probably the next most important organelle. It's the power plant of the cell. It's what accesses energy from sugar molecules. So these sugar molecules, and here's one of them here. This here is glucose. So here's glucose, C6H12O6. That is glucose. And these are made by, these are made by plants through photosynthesis. Plants can access the sugar, or we eat the plants and then we get access to the sugars, but this sugar molecule stores energy. When we eat the plant, we get those glucose molecules, we react with the oxygen that we breathe, and the purpose is to get this thing here. We won't talk a lot about it in this course. If you are interested in reading more about it, it is Chapter 5 in your text. Or you can also take a look at Unit 1 does a not bad. So Unit 1 in text also talks about this energy process as well. So if you're interested, by all means you can read about it. It's not going to be covered in this course in any great detail. But what happens is the energy comes from breaking chemical bonds in the sugar. We get that energy and we use it for literally everything. Muscle contractions, making new molecules, transporting molecules throughout our body. Almost everything we do requires the energy that's stored in these sugar molecules. And so mitochondria, their purpose is to break sugar. They break sugar for energy. And as you can see, they have a bunch of labels on them. You won't be responsible for any of the labels on the mitochondria in terms of the inner membrane, the outer membrane, matrix, cristae. All that stuff is not necessary for us, but just you should know that they are labeled. And it's along this inner membrane, actually, that the sugar gets broken down. And if you take a look, even down here, it makes mention, cells are specialized. Muscle and liver cells, there might be as many as 1,000 mitochondria inside one of those cells, because muscles, obviously, they need a lot of energy. They're the things that are moving us around. Liver cells are responsible for converting poisons into less poisonous substances. So again, they have a lot of mitochondria as well. They're also responsible for releasing our carbohydrates into our bloodstream. So those tissues have cells with a lot of mitochondria. The next organelle, ribosomes. Ribosomes are responsible for protein synthesis, or they make proteins. For Bio 30, you're going to be talking a lot about ribosomes and exactly how they work. So proteins are the fundamental building blocks of cells. They're also all of our structures. all cell structures and all, I'm going to call them cell machines, are made of protein. So ribosomes are extremely important because these are the things that are going to be using the energy to make stuff. They're constructed from amino acids, and we'll talk more about amino acids when we get to digestion. Because if we need amino acids, we should figure out how we're getting them. They're one of the tiniest organelles in our body, yet they make up more than 1/4 of the cell's mass. And this should tell you how important there are. There are so many ribosomes making proteins that they make up 1/4 of the weight of the cell. Another way to say that is, if we excluded the bone from our body, 1/4 of that leftover mass would be just from ribosomes. They're located on the rough endoplasmic reticulum. There also are some that are free-floating. So there are some that are floating around in the cytoplasm as well. But a bunch are also tacked onto the rough endoplasmic reticulum, and it's actually ribosomes are what make it rough. So here's our endoplasmic reticulum. Rough ER, or rough endoplasmic reticulum, is covered with ribosomes, and its purpose is it specializes in protein secretions, which makes sense because the proteins are made by ribosomes. The smooth endoplasmic reticulum is where fats and lipids are synthesized, and it's prevalent in cells responsible for seed development and steroid hormones, mostly because fats are compact energy. Fats are a great energy storage molecule. They store way more energy than a sugar, and what happens is when we have too much sugar in our body, that sugar is converted into a carbohydrate, and if we don't use that carbohydrate, it's then converted into a fat. And these things are long-term energy storage. Our bodies never want to get rid of energy. So the more energy we take in, the more the body stores eventually as fat. It's also used for steroid hormone production, such as things like testosterone. So all cells have probably a little bit of smooth endoplasmic reticulum, but the ones that specialize in seed development and steroid hormones have more. And in this picture here, we'll just label it. The rough ER would be the stuff covered with ribosomes. The smooth ER, it looks the same, and there's just no dots. Here's our Golgi apparatus, right here. And what the Golgi apparatus is it's a membrane that specializes in production, or packaging. So it's not making anything, but it's packaging materials to leave the cell, or unpackaging materials that have entered the cell. So here you'd have your rough ER. Here is our nucleus. And as proteins are made, so these little green things here, this would be a ribosome. And these ribosomes make proteins. So here's a protein. And it might be a protein that's responsible for some structure in our body, or a protein that does some kind of job like breaking down other molecules. But that protein, if it has to leave the cell, it gets sent to the Golgi apparatus. And what the Golgi apparatus does is it packages it into a vesicle. So these vesicle containing proteins, and now those proteins can leave the cell. So here you can see actually this vesicle here actually has some proteins drawn in it. So it's responsible for exocytosis, the passage of large molecules through the cell membrane. Like we said before, the cell membrane keeps things in and keeps things out. There are things there that act as gatekeepers. If a molecule is too big to actually squeeze through the cell membrane, it has to exit by a vesicle. So the vesicle comes up to the cell membrane, they merge together and push that protein out. An example of one of these vesicles is a lysosome. These are formed by the Golgi apparatus. So there's proteins that are made by ribosomes. They get packaged by the Golgi apparatus. And if those proteins are digestive enzymes, then it's called a lysosome. And so it contains digestive enzymes that can break down large food molecules. So those lysosomes, if large food molecules come into the cell, or if there are large food molecules outside of the cell, lysosomes are sent out to break it apart. They're also used as defense mechanisms. When they release their digestive enzymes, those enzymes can then break down any bacteria that are trying to enter the cell. They explode as pus. So this is where, if you get this, and it's part of the immune system too, but if you get some kind of, say, a splinter that gets infected, or if you even just think about pimples, what's happened is pimples are dirt that get into your pores, into your skin, and that dirt carries bacteria. Lysosomes from the surrounding cells are sent out to destroy that bacteria before it can get any deeper into your body. And as they do that, every time the lysosomes break, they release those digestive enzymes. Those digestive enzymes break apart the bacteria, and what's left over is a pocket of pus, and that pus builds up until, well, it either is absorbed by your body, or for those of you who can't help yourself, squeeze and squirt it out all over the place. So that's what pus actually is. It's damaged bacteria and exploded lysosomes. Another organelle are microtubules and microfilaments. What these are responsible for are structure and movement. They form the cytoskeleton. They're also involved in the movement of transported materials in the cytoplasm. So they're found in things like cilia, which are little hair-like structures, and they cover the entire cell, or flagella, which is more like a tail. And single-celled organisms, or even if you think about in humans, sperm are a type of cell that have a flagella, and that flagella whips around and allows it to move. So here we see how the cytoskeleton is drawn on the cell. They're drawn as these straight lines that act as almost like girders or support structures for the cell. So that's microtubules and microfilaments. When we look at plant cells, so we've looked at, though all of the structures we talked about there are in both all eukaryotic cells. So all animal cells, all plant cells have mitochondria, Golgi apparatus, ribosomes, and so forth. Plants have a few specialized structures that aren't in animal cells. One being the chloroplast, because they have to make their own food. They have to make sugar. We have the pleasure and the hardship of having to eat our food. If we had chloroplasts in our skin cells, we could probably make our own food, but we don't. There's vacuoles that we've talked about a little bit. There's storage devices, and of course that's cell wall. So these three structures were talked about near the beginning of the lecture. We're just going to recap them here. The structure is called plastids, and if you take the word chloroplast, it ends with the word plast, which is related to our plastids. They are storage and production of food. The chloroplasts contain special chlorophyll and specialized enzymes for photosynthesis. Chromoplasts store orange and yellow pigments, and what these allow for is photosynthesis, and to keep it simple, we'll say with different colors of light. So chloroplasts are really good at taking in certain colors of light to generate food and store energy. Chromoplasts or other colored plastids, if you think of say flowers and stuff like that, they have chromoplasts that help them photosynthesize different colors of light. Amyloplasts are storage. They're colorless, they store starch. Think about a potato. Potato. Holy moly, there we go. Potato. Or roots. Roots generally store a plant's food, and then as a plant needs it, those starches are sucked back up into the leaf and stems and used to cellular functions. The vacuole, like we said before, it's a storage space. Another nice thing about it is it increases the surface area of the cell. A lot of things happen along that plasma membrane in terms of reactions. By having a vacuole with another membrane, it increases the number of places where reactions can happen. So it increases surface area, and what we're going to see is this is a very important idea. When we start looking at the human body, when we look at the human digestive system and circulatory system and respiratory system, what you're going to find is at the cellular level, we're always trying to increase our surface area so that cells can interact. Our lungs are designed to maximize the amount of oxygen that can be taken from our lungs to our circulatory system, and they do that by maximizing surface area. Same thing with digestion. As food travels through our small intestine, we want to absorb as much nutrients as possible. We're going to do that by increasing surface area. Almost every structure in the human body is designed to increase surface area and minimize volume. So most organisms have a small outside shell, a small body compared to their internal surface areas. There's also the cell wall, primarily there for structure and support. In some plants, it's even providing extra strength. For example, tree trunk cells, they got to be really, really firm and structured to hold that tree up and make sure it doesn't tumble over in the wind. It's connected to the cell wall by something called a lamella. To be fair, I'm not too concerned if you remember this or not, but the middle lamella, it's a structure. It contains pectin. If we think about pectin as being that stuff we use to cement our jams or make our jams jelly-like, this pectin is like glue. And the glue holds the cell wall to the cell membrane. And so I guess in this picture here, it's not labeled, we can label it now. This yellow layer here will represent a lamella. So the chemical composition of cells, here's what cells are made of. They're constructed of 4 basic types of organic molecules: lipids, carbohydrates, proteins, and nucleic acids. Lipids, fats, oils, and waxes, these are all about energy storage. And each of these molecules can be classified in one of 2 ways. They're either going to be related to energy, except for maybe cellulose is kind of structure. Or they are structures and machines. So proteins are either structures or machines, and we'll talk more about proteins at the beginning of the next unit, or nucleic acids, which is really our genetic or hereditary material. So all cells are composed, all the structures in cells are composed of these 4 types of molecules: lipid molecules, carbohydrate molecules, proteins, and nucleic acids. Those are the 4 types of molecules that all of our cells contain. The other thing we should know about cells, at least in general terms, is all cells have to come from cells. So remember, all of this is based on cell theory, and there are 2 ways for cells to reproduce: meiosis and mitosis. In general terms, and in Bio 30, you'll be going over this in a lot more detail, but multicellular organisms require growth and repair. This is going to be done with mitosis. So when you think about your body growing, you start out as a little baby, and then you become a toddler and a child, and all this time your body's growing. It's increasing in size. This is done by mitosis. So as we grow, all the cells in our body are reproducing themselves to take up more space and make us bigger. These cells are called somatic cells, body cells. And this is like heart, lungs, skin, muscle, all that kind of stuff. Cells, for the most part, can only make identical cells. So as your skin grows, it does so by having skin cells divide and reproduce. As your muscles grow, when new muscle cells are needed, they do so by reproducing muscle cells and only muscle cells. Another way to say this is that a skin cell, even though all the genetic information is there, it can't go and make a heart cell. So that doesn't happen. In multicellular organisms, reproductive cells do something called meiosis. And the purpose of meiosis is to create cells with less DNA, so they can get together, sperm and eggs can get together and make a new individual with new qualities. So there's two types of cell division, and that's mostly all we're going to say for now. Mitosis, and this is for growth. Here's mitosis here. And meiosis, which is sexual reproduction. Its purpose, at the end, these cells down here, these are going to end up being either sperm or eggs. That's it. That's all that meiosis does. These cells here, if you take a look, and this is the big difference, the mother cell is exactly the same as both daughter cells. When you take a look at meiosis, the parent cell or the mother cell is different from all four of the daughter cells. And these daughter cells are all unique amongst themselves as well. So that's the big difference between meiosis and mitosis. So in summary, here's what you should get from this lecture. All living organisms are classified into one of three domains based on their cellular structure. The bacteria and archaea are prokaryotes. They don't have a nucleus, and they're missing most organelles. They have ribosomes, and that's about it. Eukaryotes belong to the eukarya domain. These guys have a nucleus. Cells interact with their environment through organelles, and each organelle has a specific function. You should know each function. So you should be, if you were asked, what does a mitochondria do? You would say a mitochondria provides energy for the cell by breaking down sugars. All cells reproduce through cell division, either mitosis or meiosis. Mitosis is called asexual reproduction. Meiosis is sexual reproduction. And that's our journey through the cell. One more lecture to go, and we're finished Unit 1.